Anthony spun the canvas, his movements abrupt and filled with a sense of urgency. He did it with a sudden, jerky motion, as if trying to shake off an invisible weight. His right hand, usually so sure with a brush, trembled uncontrollably, betraying his inner turmoil. It was as if an unseen force had taken hold, guiding his actions in a way he couldn't comprehend. He stared at the blank side, now facing him, a void that seemed to challenge his very existence. An unsettling sensation washed over him, a mix of fear and anticipation that he couldn't shake off. It was the urge to abandon everything he knew, to let go of all the techniques and rules he had mastered over the years.
He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the overwhelming emotions that threatened to consume him. Anthony took a deep breath, filling his lungs with air as if preparing for a dive into the unknown. When he opened his eyes, the blank canvas seemed to pulsate with a life of its own, almost as if it were breathing. It was no longer just a surface, it was a dare, a challenge that beckoned him to explore uncharted territories.
He set his right hand down, his fingers uncurling as if releasing a secret, a hidden truth that had been locked away. The paintbrush clattered onto the table, a jarring sound that echoed in the silence of his studio, amplifying his sense of isolation. With his left hand, he picked up a brush, the unfamiliar weight feeling both strange and exhilarating. It felt alien, clumsy in his grip, yet there was a certain thrill in the awkwardness, a promise of something new. There was a strange thrill in the awkwardness, a sense of adventure that he hadn't felt in years.
His left hand danced across the canvas, moving with a fluidity that surprised even him. It moved hesitantly at first, then with increasing confidence, as if finding its own rhythm. He felt a sense of liberation, a breaking free from the constraints of his own making, as if he were rediscovering himself.
The brush strokes were raw, instinctive, each one a testament to his newfound freedom. They lacked the precision of his right hand, but there was a beauty in their imperfection. But there was an undeniable energy, a primal force behind each movement, as if he were channeling a deeper part of himself. It was as if his left hand was a conduit to a part of himself he never knew existed, a part that had been waiting to be unleashed, a part that was raw, untamed, and utterly freeing, allowing him to create in a way he had never imagined possible. He worked feverishly. Hours melted away, unnoticed and unimportant. His left hand, once hesitant, moved with growing assurance. The canvas began to fill with a whirlwind of colors and shapes. It was abstract, chaotic, and yet strangely compelling. It pulsed with an energy that was both exhilarating and terrifying.
His right hand twitched occasionally. It yearned to take over, to impose order on the chaos, but Anthony resisted. He knew that this new way of painting was important. It was unlocking something within him, something raw and real.
It was a language he never knew he could speak, a language of instinct and emotion.
The movements of his left hand were liberating. Each stroke felt like a rebellion against the rigid control he had always imposed on his art. There was a freedom in the imperfection, a beauty in the rawness.
It was as if his left hand was painting directly from his soul, bypassing the filters of his conscious mind. He felt a sense of exhilaration he hadn't experienced in years. It was the joy of pure creation, unburdened by expectation or the need for perfection. His left hand moved with an urgency that surprised him. It was as if it needed to get something out, something that had been trapped inside for too long.
The painting grew larger, more complex with each passing day. It seemed to take on a life of its own, expanding and evolving in ways that Anthony could hardly comprehend. It dominated the studio, a swirling vortex of color and emotion that seemed to pulse with an almost tangible energy. The colors were vibrant yet dark, creating a paradox that was both beautiful and unsettling. Anthony found himself drawn to it, compelled to work on it day and night. He couldn't pull himself away, as if the painting had cast a spell over him, binding him to its creation. He lost track of time, neglecting everything else in his life. Meals went uneaten, phone calls unanswered, and the world outside his studio seemed to fade into irrelevance.
His girlfriend Brianna noticed the change in him. She was worried, her concern growing with each passing day as she watched him become more and more consumed by his work. He became secretive about his work, hiding the painting from her as if it were a forbidden treasure. He would turn the canvas to the wall whenever Brianna was around, shielding it from her curious eyes. He kept the canvas turned to the wall whenever Brianna was around, creating a barrier between his obsession and her concern. When she asked about it, he would evade her questions, offering vague answers that only deepened her worry. Their conversations grew tense, filled with unspoken fears and unanswered questions.
He couldn't explain the strange hold the painting had over him. It was as if it had a voice, whispering to him, guiding his hand with every brushstroke. He didn't understand it himself. The more he painted, the less he felt in control, as if the artwork was dictating its own creation. The act of creation had become an obsession, fueled by a darkness he couldn't explain. It was a compulsion that drove him to work feverishly, his mind consumed by the images that flowed from his brush.
He felt a growing unease, a sense of dread that gnawed at the edges of his consciousness. The painting was no longer just a piece of art, it was something more, something darker. There was something unsettling about the images that were emerging on the canvas. Twisted figures, contorted faces, and haunting eyes stared back at him as if they were alive. Twisted figures, contorted faces, and haunting eyes stared back at him. They seemed to hold secrets, dark and terrible, that he was both desperate and terrified to uncover. They seemed to writhe and shift as he worked, whispering to him from some dark recess of his mind. The whispers were faint, but persistent, filling his thoughts with a sense of foreboding.
He couldn't shake the feeling that he was unleashing something dangerous, something that he might not be able to control. The fear gnawed at him, growing stronger with each passing day. Something that he might not be able to control. Fear gnawed at him, a constant companion that shadowed his every move. He was afraid of what he might find if he delved too deeply into the darkness that was emerging on the canvas. The unknown terrified him, yet he couldn't stop himself from exploring it. But he was also strangely drawn to it, mesmerized by the raw power that seemed to emanate from the swirling colors and shapes. It was a dangerous dance, and he was both the dancer and the one being led. It was a dangerous dance, and he was both the dancer and the one being led. The painting had become his world, a world where beauty and terror coexisted, and he was its captive.
He would wake up in the middle of the night, his heart pounding. The images from the canvas would be seared into his mind, grotesque and distorted, yet strangely familiar. They haunted him, whispering of forgotten memories and buried secrets. He tried to ignore them, to focus on the joy he felt when he was painting, because there was still joy, there was no denying it.
When I allowed myself to get lost in the act of creation, when my left hand danced across the canvas, I felt truly alive. It was a feeling I had almost forgotten, a feeling I craved.
He clung to those moments of joy like a lifeline. They were the only thing keeping him afloat in the sea of darkness that was rising around him. He knew he was walking a tightrope, balancing on the edge of something dangerous, but the exhilaration of creation, the feeling of liberation he found in the chaos, was addictive.
I told myself that I could control it, that I could explore the darkness without being consumed by it. But deep down, a part of me knew I was lying. The darkness was seductive, whispering promises of power and revelation. It was a siren song, and I was powerless to resist its call.
Brianna found him one afternoon, slumped over the canvas. He was asleep, his face pale and streaked with paint. She was about to wake him when she noticed the canvas. She gasped. It was unlike anything he had ever painted before. It was dark, chaotic, and deeply unsettling.
I saw him in the canvas, a figure shrouded in shadow, his features obscured. The figure seemed to be reaching out from the canvas, his eyes fixed on Anthony with an intensity that made me shiver. I had seen that figure before, or rather, I had seen Anthony staring at that figure.
It had started subtly, a fleeting glimpse of Anthony gazing at an empty corner, his face a mixture of fear and fascination. Then she started finding drawings, quick, frantic sketches of the same shadowed figure, always watching, always menacing.
When I confronted Anthony, he brushed it off. He was just experimenting, he said. It meant nothing. But I knew it wasn't nothing. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and I was terrified of what it might mean.
The nightmares began, creeping into his sleep like unwelcome guests. Vivid, terrifying dreams filled with shadows and whispers, echoing through the corridors of his mind. He would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding in his chest, the echoes of his dreams still ringing in his ears. The line between dreams and reality blurred, leaving him in a constant state of confusion and fear. He started seeing things in the periphery of his vision, shadows that seemed to move just out of sight, fleeting glimpses of movement, shadows that seemed to dart out of sight when he turned his head, leaving him questioning his sanity.
I couldn't tell if it was the lack of sleep, the intensity of my work, or something more sinister lurking in the shadows of my mind. But I felt myself unraveling, my grip on reality slipping with each passing day, as if I were being pulled into a dark abyss.
The shadowy figure from his paintings haunted his waking hours, a constant reminder of his growing madness. He saw it everywhere he looked, lurking in the shadows, watching him with cold, calculating eyes that seemed to pierce his soul.
I became more insistent, my pleas growing more desperate with each passing day. I begged him to stop painting, to get some help, but he couldn't stop, as if he were possessed by some unseen force. The canvas beckoned him, whispering promises of revelation and release, drawing him in deeper with each stroke of his brush. He was caught in its web, unable to break free, no matter how hard he struggled.
He pushed her away, his words harsh and dismissive, his mind clouded by the darkness that consumed him. He couldn't risk her seeing the truth, the darkness that was consuming him, the madness that was taking over. He knew he was pushing her away, but he couldn't help himself, trapped in a battle with his own mind. He was afraid of what he might do, what he might become, as the darkness continued to spread. The darkness was spreading, seeping into every aspect of his life, leaving him feeling more isolated and helpless. And he was powerless to stop it, trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape.